Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching. The channel's called Ratchet. My name's Andrew, and on this episode of my GT40 restoration, I redesigned the rear clam hinge assembly. Run the title.
Welcome to the channel if you're new. If you're not, thank you for tuning back in for yet another episode. I'm hoping for you guys this is going to be an enjoyable one to watch. Certainly I've got a lot achieved. You will see that the rear clam is now sat on the car. And for those of you that have been following for quite some time, you may remember that it's always been my intention to redesign the rear chassis hinge bracket system that these Tornado chassis actually use. So that's basically involved me chopping off the old, welding in some new, designing some parts, getting those cut, and a whole load of fabrication in between. And I'm over the moon to say everything worked out as it should first time. So I will try and share the story the best I can with you, and I hope you enjoy following along. As always, the usuals, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Let's just get on with it. So I've got a rough plan. Nothing is fixed in stone at the moment. All I know is what I want to actually remove. There's space for the new small section of chassis that I want to fabricate. The rear gearbox mounts will be staying in place. So I'm going to be cutting off the excess either side and the diagonal brace that you can see just there. And then from there, I'll look to make good and give myself a foundation to then build off what I need to redesign this rear hinge area. Once I'd chopped off the outriggers of the rear portion of the chassis and the diagonal bracing, now I must admit I thought I had recorded it, but it wasn't on my memory card, so I do apologise. So once I'd removed all of that, it was time that I really gave some careful consideration and thought into how I should actually redesign or design this whole assembly, because I still hadn't come up with a hard and fast plan. Now, I had been collecting a number of images through the GT40 forum or what I'd found online, some drawings and bits and pieces to try and compile a folder, an inspirations folder, which would then allow me to have a look through, pick out the bits that I liked and try and put together my own design. And my plan ended up being a culmination of a few ideas that I pulled together, starting with the basic shape that I liked of the Taylor's rear hinge bracket. I liked that overall design. I wanted to incorporate the locking bolt that the Southern GTs use, just for a bit of added protection and just to stop any movement and play once the body was sat onto the chassis. So working together with those designs, I jumped into AutoCAD and just pulled together a very basic 2D design, working into it all of the elements that I wanted to have as part of this finished piece. And you can see here that once I had the bracket designed, I then went ahead and worked up the actual bobbin, which would bolt to the chassis and allow everything to pivot around that. And then moving on from there, you'll see the plates that I've designed, and they sandwich the fiberglass structure in between the two, making everything really super tight and secure for me to then bolt the bracket to and finally hang all of that off of this single bobbin. So now having the design, I needed a company who could cut all this for me, whether it be laser or water. I wasn't really fussed. Now, it turned out that there was a company fairly close to me that could laser cut this. It's a company called Central Laser Services. Now, I must admit, I've never used them before, but the service that they have provided me over these few little jobs has been absolutely fantastic. I sent them a DXF file of the parts that I wanted cutting. I told them the thickness of material that I wanted and obviously the quantity. So the parts were ready for collection. I shot up there, and after a lot of careful measuring and cross-checking squareness and trueness on both sides, I finally drilled some holes in the rear clam to get everything mounted up. So everything is perpendicular and upright, which will allow the hinges to rotate through their movement without any binding up and risking cracking any fiberglass. While I was waiting for the brackets to be cut, I went to a local engineer's and had the bobbins turned up out of some general grade aluminium. So that left me with the only thing necessary left to do, and that was to go and buy some inch round bar and start connecting the dots really, start sticking my new metal to the existing chassis. I just got stuck in and had a go. I've never really done any tube notching of any description, and both ends of every length were funny and awkward angles, some requiring a fish mouth, some requiring being cut on a 2-axis angle, if that makes sense. So I just took my time and was patient with the cuts and the trimming. Now, if I'm honest, it ended up coming together so quickly. You know, I'm talking less than a day's work to get the whole new rear chassis cut and welded into place. So I surprised myself, if I'm perfectly honest, and I'm glad it wasn't an uphill battle, you know, right from square one. What you can see behind me is the fact that the clam is now removed from the car. I'm amazed, surprised, and possibly a little bit smug in saying that the hinge system worked absolutely perfectly first time around. So with the clam removed, I carried out the final seam welding of all of the joints. It has now been cleaned up, and basically I'm at a stage to get the car masked off, get everything protected, and lay down some etch primer, followed by finally some satin black. And as if by magic, a day later, we are painted, done and dusted. I've got the brake lines back in and everything connected up. I've got the new bobbins that I had made bolted into place. Now these are solid mounted, so I've designed these not to move because I want the hinge on the rear clam to rotate around this bobbin on the side. What I can do now is actually get the rear clam lifted onto the back of the car again. And while the back end's on, I think I might put the rear lights on, put my gurney flap on, get the loom run and everything like that, just because I can. And it's another step closer to getting this thing done. So there you have it. Rear clam hinge assembly is done. What I want to do now is just go around the back end, pointing out a few nice little details that I've sort of worked in to the build and show you basically how far I've got it assembled. So first off, here are the hinges with the spacers and the sandwich plates that I've designed. Everything fitted up really nicely and it all seems to be working beautifully. I have had the clam off and the locating bolt and the actual beak of the bracket works as it should, if I'm honest. It lifts off really nice and easily. So I think I'm classing this as a result. So my cable restraint, I actually stole an idea from another guy who's building a GT40 over in America. And he used an American lorry, I think it was a Peterbilt. So where they've got those huge long noses, when they tip forwards, they need some form of cable restraint. So these cables are pre-coiled. So when the body's down, it coils up into a nice tight number of loops. So I bought a couple of those cables from America, basically cut them down to length to suit the front and the rear clams. So this is something that is super simple, but I think adds to that kind of sort of period feel. One thing I've not shown you that has been made for an absolute age are my bonnet pin brackets that I made up. Now these are just made up very simply of some 1.2mm aluminium. I basically made myself a cardboard template, folded them up, picked myself up some dimple dies just to add a little bit of detail and just sort of really fit in with the whole look in the back of the car. Let me drop down the back and then you can see what else has been going on. So I've got the bonnet pins fitted, got my Hartwell latches fitted up and everything aligns as it needed to, which is brilliant news. Coming around the back, I have got the gurney flap fitted, so that was Scotch-Brite, treated with a Nyalic and then fitted up. And then the pre-65 Lucas rear lights, and it looks fantastic. And then finally the view from the back. Now you can see how I've cut around that rear chassis and how different it looks from the original Tornado one. And I really couldn't be happier about how this has turned out. So that wraps up this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. It certainly feels like a lot's been achieved. Seeing the car sat in the garage with all of its clothes on, you know, feels like a real nice achievement. Now, coming up in the next episode, I think it's going to be digging out the engine and gearbox and starting what I fear will be a bit of an epic cleanup job, really, just to try and get those pieces worthy of sitting back in the car, to be honest. So there's going to be a heck of a lot of cleanup work, some part refurbishment, and goodness knows whatever else. But whatever there is, I will make sure I share it with you guys. So up until then, I will catch you next time.